Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to participate in today's webcast on emotions of racism. My name is Ryan Chankoka with OG Life Labs, and I'll be serving as your webinar host for today. My role is to help go through the chat function, so feel free to message any comments or questions that you have via the chat and Q&A function. I'll also help with any technical issues that you might have during the webinar, so feel free to directly message me in that same chat function. So I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce today's panelists. You heard their names and their titles, but we'll take just a little bit of a deeper dive for each one, and we'll start with Janet. Janet Miller-Evans is a professional certified coach and thought leader with areas of focus in leadership development, team group coaching, emotional intelligence, and D&I. Janet is certified with the International Coaches Federation, or ICF, and holds a certification in emotional intelligence. Glad to have you with us, Janet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. Nice to be here.
All right, thank you. Stephen Baines is an organizational development, image consultant, trainer, and executive coach. Currently, Stephen works as a talent and OD consultant at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. In the past, he served as a chairperson of the board for the City of Cincinnati Health Department and as the D&I co-chair for the Human Rights Campaign in Greater Cincinnati. Stephen holds a bachelor's and master's degree and is currently pursuing his PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from Walden. It's a pleasure to have you, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. And David Grant specializes in pragmatic integral coaching, working with high-level executives and influential leaders in some of the world's most well-respected companies, including Accenture, Apple, E&Y, IBM, McKinsey, and United Health Group. And prior to his coaching career, David enjoyed 20 years as a leader in such varied roles as factory manager for Berkshire Hathaway, consulting at Deloitte, and serving as Global VP of Korn Ferry's Leadership and Talent Consultancy. Pleasure to have you, David. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan.
And as always with us is Andrea Hoban, who'll be moderating our conversation today as the co-founder and head of learning for OG Life Lab, where she is responsible for developing and delivering the firm's emotional intelligence learning programs. And before OG, Andrea was responsible for global skills training for the global staffing firm Robert Half, delivering programs in 17 countries. Andrea is also a certified coach as well as a yoga instructor. Always a pleasure, my friend. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And absolutely. And before I turn it over to Andrea, I just want to remind everyone to utilize Zoom's comment and chat function, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we'll do our best to have our panel address these questions and any thoughts throughout, as well as at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Andrea, I'll turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And thank you, panelists. It's a real privilege to be here with you today to have what I hope is a very helpful discussion. It's always really fun at the beginning of these to see where people are joining us from. And we've seen they're outside the country here and all over the United States. And so if you haven't checked in and you feel comfortable doing so, I would keep that going, because I just think it shows the breadth and depth of people who are joining us today. And we really do like to use chat as a really functional part of our conversation here. Yeah, now you're doing it. Look at that. That's nice. I just want to say that what prompted this conversation is obviously the recent deaths of Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. The problems that we are facing and the pain of racism in this country sit front and center right now. And this is a massive nationwide conversation. And where we think we can be helpful is to talk about how the skills of emotional intelligence can help us navigate the complexities of the emotions we're experiencing as a result of all of that. I know it's a very small part of a much larger set of issues. And as Janet said when we first talked about hosting this session, she said we could talk about this for weeks and barely scratch the surface. So apologies in advance if we don't hit on something that's really front and center for you today, but hopefully we help you make a greater understanding and get something from here that really can help you moving forward. It's worth noting that two of our original panelists, Dr. Robin Stern and Dr. Ray Reagans, are professors and administrators at prestigious U.S. universities. And on their campuses, these issues are amplified and the calls to actions are really urgent. And so they had to bow out today due to conflicts. That said, Robin will be with us in our next webinar. to be determined. So you'll receive more information about that when we get it all set and scheduled. One final note before we begin. I ask that in order to create an atmosphere where we can all have a truly productive dialogue, that we keep communications respectful and honoring of all perspectives. This includes what you write in chat, includes the questions that you pose in the Q&A. We'll have zero tolerance for anything less than that kind of respectful and honorable behavior. And if we see it, we'll remove you from the session. I know emotions can be strong around issues of race, but as we discussed, our behavior is a separate thing from the emotions that we are experiencing. So panelists, thank you for joining us today. And I'm gonna pass it over to Janet.
Thank you, Andrea. And hello, everyone. And we really do appreciate you joining us and continuing this conversation. I know you're having them where you are, and I know you'll have more of them because this is a very important topic. And the subject of race and racist practices throughout the U.S. and in some places, other countries, has been going on for a very, very long time. And as we all know here in the U.S., over 400 years. So we recognize that these conversations are just stepping stones to action. There are immediate actions that can be taken, but to change an entire system will take longer than 4 days, 4 weeks, even 4 months. So again, we appreciate you being here and appreciate your support. And those of you who are allies, we appreciate you joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to ask us, mindfulness is a huge part of managing and regulating our emotions. So I'd like for us to just take 30 seconds. We won't take 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but just 30 seconds of just wherever you are. If you want to plant your feet on the floor and become grounded, some people may close their eyes, some may leave them open, some just whatever you need, but just 30 seconds of silence to still ourselves and bring ourselves present here in this conversation, and hopefully constructive dialogue and outcomes can come just from this, small actions that we can take as we leave. So if we begin now, we'll just take 30 seconds. And thank you for taking these seconds with us. Thank you. So if someone had a stopwatch, just let me know if I was on time.
You were pretty darn close to the precise 30-second measurement.
All right.
So thank you, Janet. My first question for the three of you is how you're feeling today. Who would like to go first?
Since I had the floor, I guess I'll continue to kick it off. Of course, you're always nervous when you're talking in front of a big crowd, so I have a little nerves, so bear with me there. But in all seriousness, I feel I feel numb in some ways, in that it's hard to believe that this is real. And every day that things go on, it's like grief. It subsides as far as the strong emotions of frustration or anger or just bewilderment on how people can be so inhumane to others. But then you have those spurts again where you're just angry and you're saying, why? What would make someone feel that much hatred? And so right now I'm feeling hopeful and excited about what can happen, but I'm also concerned about emotional fatigue. Mm. This is a very difficult subject, and sometimes because people ask me, my clients ask me about it, colleagues, family, I have 2 millennial children. Some things I have to explain to them because they just didn't know. And it can be taxing. So I think about that, and I think about that for others. So just making sure that I'm taking care of myself, and that's why I do the meditations and the mindfulness practices so that I can stay regulated and I can stay in this conversation because it's a long conversation, and I don't want to lose that momentum.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome.
And Andrea, I'll go next. I want to build on something that Janet said because I'm also feeling personally the emotional fatigue that you described, both my own and also what I'm hearing from my clients and the people that I work with every day. I think one thing you said at the top, Andrea, was we could take weeks to have this conversation. I feel like I could take weeks just to inventory all the different emotions that I'm experiencing right now personally. And Janet named some of them for me. One of them is anger. One of them is hope. One of them, I would say, is fear. And I'll be transparent. I'm concerned about this conversation, wanting to be helpful, and concerned about not being helpful in the things that I have to say and the conversation that we have to have here today with each other. So that's what's happening for me. Like Janet, I feel the most important thing that I can personally do and that we can all do for each other is just stay tuned into ourselves so that we can continue to be present and be in this conversation for the long haul, not just for the next 45 minutes or so, but for good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening for me right now.
Thank you.
And I'll bring up the rear. I echo both of what Janet and David have said. For me, it's up and down. It's a roller coaster. And I just realized that, as David just said, it's a long haul. I get up, I'm anxious. I'm like, oh, what's going to happen today? My own emotions, plus regulating my friends and colleagues' emotions, especially lots of white friends calling, some calling, how are you doing? And others like, what can I do? So you've got that up and down roller coaster as well going on. I just want to be clear, Black Lives Matter, Black women matter, Black trans women matter, Black trans men, because I'm getting that as well from people that, even within those subsets of communities, that when we say Black Lives Matter, some people think, well, what about Black women, or what about the trans community? And those communities are like a subset. Well, I won't even call them a subset. They are part of Black Lives Matter, but then people just think it's Black men, and it is not Black men. It's happening to the Black community, and we just have to be clear about that.
Yeah.
May I add something to that, Andrea?
Yeah.
Stephen, that's a good point to bring up. And we probably have all heard it, but we would always be remiss if we didn't remind, this is about Black lives. This is a Black lives in America. It extends throughout the world. But the issues that we are faced in this country are first and foremost what we want to address in these discussions. That's how I'm interpreting this. And we want to be clear about that, because we can dilute it with conversations of bias and different kinds of bias and who has bias and what is bias. We're talking about racist practices in the United States of America that have been harmful and detrimental to the Black American community. And when we talk about that, and we've heard a lot about the gentleman, but we do not want to forget that one of the other faces is Black females. And it's not about just the death, the physical death of leaving this earth for Black females. It's about the silent abuse that they take, even sometimes in calling the police, and rape occurs or physical harm occurs. There are silent abuses that happen to Black women that go unspoken because they aren't seen. So all of this is very important. And as we peel back the layers of what needs to happen to bring Black Americans to parity as they should be as all Americans, we want to think about all of the things that are happening to us that are abusive and harmful, that don't allow us to be our full selves and to take advantage of the opportunities given to everyone else. So I just wanted to bring that up in honor of the Sandra Blands and the Breonna Taylors and all the Black women who, in my opinion, are giving their lives in the struggle.
Yeah.
And we appreciate and we honor all of them, and we send sympathies to their families. And we want to protect all of us that are still here today.
Absolutely. I want to come back to a theme and thread I heard from all of your check-ins. And while I ask this question, I actually would invite all of you on chat to share how you're feeling right now. You know, because the theme I want to pick up on is this theme of exhaustion and fatigue, because I'm seeing some questions come in about that. But if you feel comfortable just naming how you're feeling right now to all the attendees, that would be very, I think, interesting for all of us to see. But in terms of what all of the three of you have talked about in terms of exhaustion and fatigue, it's kind of a two-part question I want to ask. One is how you're personally managing it, and what happens when you don't, meaning, you know, one of my worries as a white person who's really leaning into this conversation and this work is that it will eventually get so uncomfortable that many white people will step away from it, that their fatigue will cause them to withdraw from the engagement of it. So I think, you know, getting to the heart of what do we do with our fatigue and our exhaustion is a really important way of navigating these conversations. So who of you would like to talk about that?
Yeah, and Andrea, I can go first. For me, it's been a matter of modulating my effort and my engagement with things. I think in order to take on something so emotionally charged and so important like this, it's important to give yourself some space to relax and rest and re-regulate yourself before jumping back in. So some of the things that I've been doing are just regular practices that we would encourage as coaches to people that we're working with anyway. So those would include something that Janet led us through at the beginning, which are breathing exercises, some mindfulness practices, honestly, some just taking a step back and allowing yourself to appreciate some things that you're grateful for in your life, or to appreciate beauty or the loved ones you have around you. So that's the rest part. The active part for me has been trying to learn and listen in a way that I haven't before. And that would include reading, consuming things that I'm finding helpful on the internet. One thing in particular that I've been really enamored with is uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. Have you seen this one? Yeah. I'm finding that really helpful. So that's it's sort of that pattern of rest and then active engagement, and this is one of those active engagement activities, right? Just being able to sit down with you all and to have a heartfelt conversation and to listen in a different way.
Yeah,
so that's how I'm personally doing it.
Thank you, David. And I just want to say that a lot of things that I'm seeing that are coming in through chat are how tired, fatigued, exhausted, and yet hopeful, but also feelings of helplessness and disappointment and concern, and yet a lot of themes around hope, which Mark Brackett likes to talk about hope in itself as a strategy, an emotional intelligence strategy. So, I just wanted to kind of keep those comments coming, because it sounds like what we're talking about here is resonating with your own experience. But Stephen or Janet, anything you would add in terms of navigating fatigue and exhaustion?
Yeah, I echo, you have to really take care of yourself before you can really try to even take care of others. Breathing, as David mentioned, I agree. Exercise, eating healthy, sugar, alcohol, minimum, so that you don't just get hooked on those things so much. I mean, I know for myself that I've made it the practice that, okay, if I want to have an alcoholic beverage, it can only be like a beer or wine. I don't have spirits at home by myself, because it's so easy. We're all staying at home so much, and you can just pour yourself another cocktail. I don't want to do that. I believe in biohacking. I'm a big biohacker, and here it is. I just bought this recently, and then it's not charged, but this is an Apollo, if people can see it, and it just kind of goes around your wrist or your leg, and it's got different settings on it. I don't get any royalties from this, so.
Well, we are not the news, the cable news. We don't have commercials. No.
Yeah. I just got that about a week ago, but there's settings on there, where you can program it, and it buzzes and it tries to calm your vagus nerve. So it's just different things that, you can look to see how can you help yourself just be relaxed. Checking in with friends, but don't feel like you have to rescue them. I mean, feel like you can help them, but I think oftentimes, especially as coaches and people who are helpers, we want to just save everybody. We can't save the world, but we can help people. I believe in trying to point people into the right direction and say, hey, here are some resources. And that way people can pick and choose what resources that they want for themselves. So those are things that I've been doing.
Thank you, Stephen. Janet?
Yes. When I feel that fatigue, I do take those moments of breathing or meditation. You can download free apps on breathing or meditation. All of the smartphones have those free apps. But when I really think of fatigue, I think of the civil rights struggle that was in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 60s. And those people didn't get tired to advance us to this point. So I can't get tired. And when I'm fatigued, I think that one more breath that we had with the latest shooting in Atlanta, where the young man was just running away. You can imagine the fatigue he was feeling. He had been there for 40 minutes answering questions, and he's just wanting to run away and get away. You can imagine him seeing the visions of what's happened to his brothers and sisters before him. And so when I get fatigued, as I was yesterday, exhausted from discussions and client meetings, I thought, but I cannot be fatigued. I have to have that extra discussion. I have to be able to take care of myself, but also stay in this movement because we have the attention. We have allies. I'm probably the senior person on the call, being respectful, but I know that we've not seen this kind of ally support since that last major movement. And so Black Lives Matter, and I want to help save the next one. So if I have to have that extra conversation with someone who says, help me understand, I will help them understand what the history is limited. And as Stephen said, refer them to the readings, because I know most of us on this call have probably been inundated. So there's no reason for someone to say, I don't know what the issue is, because all of us can just hit a button and send them an email and say, start reading. So I can't be fatigued. I won't. And I will say, I love music, and I went straight to Hamilton. We don't want to miss our shot, and we must be in the room. Mm-hmm. And then we call on our white allies to implement the solutions, because they are the only ones who can help implement the solutions. But what we can do, and that's another thing, is vote. And we can do that. We can own our responsibility in this, in helping our next brother and sister. And we can make sure that we're keeping things civilly discussed.
Yeah.
Because that's how emotionally we can move forward. And we talk about emotions. When you have those emotions, name it, call it out. If you need to step away, say, I need to take a moment here. But the emotions are going to come because emotions are real. And they'll come in many forms, and you'll have as many as you have as minutes in the day. But again, and you can go online, you can do a little reading about emotional intelligence. Andrea here, the founder of OG Life Labs, OG has a mobile app that you can use on your phone and learn about emotional intelligence and the techniques to help you regulate through this. So whatever it takes to keep us preparing the way for others, so that we can rid this country of this once and for all. We can't get fatigued. I can't, and I hope you join me.
Yeah, I hear strong purpose is a way that you manage and navigate your own personal fatigue. And I also thank Stephen and David for talking too, and as you did, Janet, about personal care, that we have to attend to our personal physical needs and emotional needs. And as you pointed out, Janet, one of the main skills of emotional intelligence is learning to recognize what we're feeling. We have no capacity to use those emotions as a source of wisdom or a way of determining what action we can take to make things right if we're not in touch with how we actually feel. And while a lot of these emotions are painful and quite unpleasant to experience, it is a necessary first step we have to take to get there. So my follow-up question for the three of you then is, why do you think it's so hard to talk about race?
We don't want to hurt people's feelings. One of them is, especially if you have a friend of a different race, you may not want to hurt their feelings. Sometimes it's about employment. I got a friend today, a white female, and she sent me a text message, and we have a mutual Black friend and male friend, and she said he really is proud and envious of you for speaking out about some of this stuff on social media. And he's in a job where he doesn't feel like he can, and so it's things like employment, feelings, relationships, those things. But, at the end of the day, I'm going to call him later, is we have to have the courage to just do these things, because that's what's holding us back. People are not feeling courageous enough. I think we have to help people feel courageous to be able to do the things that they know they should do. It goes back to the thing about Aunt Jemima. You probably all saw where Aunt Jemima, after 130 years, is now thinking about the rebranding because of the racial stereotypes, as well as Uncle Ben's rice and Mrs. Butterworth. And one of my white female friends, she was like, and she's in marketing, and she was just like, oh, that's great that they're doing it, but, wow, that's going to be really a challenge to have to rebrand all this and this kind of stuff. And I just kind of jumped in and said, it's been 130 years. And yeah, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge to live as a Black person every day. And it's a challenge to have to do all these things every day. And they also were called to task, meaning Quaker Oats, at least 5 years ago. And beyond that, B. Smith's husband brought it to the attention in 2015. But see, it fell on deaf ears because they weren't getting the pressure. So now that there's pressure, it's tied to the economics of the issue. So it's not right. The climate's not right. All these are just nice buzzwords and so forth, right? It's like it's hitting them in their pocketbook now. And people are saying, oh no, this is not right. It wasn't right before. but you didn't want to do anything because you weren't getting the economic pressure. So that's why I'm going to tell my friend, you just have to say something.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you, Stephen.
I want to build on something that Stephen said. I agree. There's a big component of that reticence that comes from wanting to stay in relation with the other person, right? From not wanting to hurt people's feelings. But this structural element is critical. We've got hundreds of years of machinery that's basically been put in place that keep all of this running. Mm-hmm. And it is hard for people to challenge their own paradigms. Harder still for them to think that they can make a difference against the structure that's been put in place. So I think that's what keeps some people from it. I think there's an amount. I'll speak for myself. I won't suggest that I can speak for all white men, but I'll speak for myself. There's an amount of shame and guilt that keeps me from engaging in a conversation, feeling like up until this moment, maybe I haven't done enough. I'm part of the establishment, both as a white man, but also as a man who's 50. What's my role that I've played so far, and can I feel proud of that? And for some of us, the answer is no, and that might keep us from having that conversation because we feel like we've wanted to do something before, but we just haven't. So there's an amount of guilt and shame, I would say, that keeps people from having the right conversation.
Thank you, David. Jan, anything you want to say about that?
Well, just to piggyback on what David said, the guilt that whites feel about the state of affairs, it's unfortunate that that guilt is there, and I ask not for David to answer, but for every white person to say, why am I guilty? If I haven't done anything, if your mom says you took cookies from a cookie jar and you say, Mom, I didn't do it, you don't walk away feeling guilty. You might be sad that she accused you, but guilty, I would say that's a part of the emotional intelligence, naming really what the emotion is. But the second piece of that is understanding and recognizing patterns. So then to understand, why are you feeling guilty? And perhaps with understanding that, you can move past that guilt. I was speaking to one of my local politicians about this, and the guilt response came up, but also the fear of saying the wrong thing. And my response was, if you're speaking with someone who is really engaged with you and in touch with their emotional intelligence, if you say the wrong thing, they will correct you. And you will know not to say that or do that again. But that is another emotion of being embarrassed or feeling vulnerable that you want to call up and address. Because again, race, this whole subject of race, racism, or racist practices, it's emotions. Because we now know from history, the race part of it is a myth. We're all human beings. And then the other reason, and this was a white politician, the other reason was they know they would be ostracized. And that's part of the major problem, I think, that has carried this over and let it become so embedded in our system. And that's where you have to make an emotional call and a moral judgment of if you can go along with watching people be marginalized and killed because you may have to make a new friend. And for anyone with the emotion about friends and being a part of groups, I always tell myself, there's over 350 million people in America. I know I can find another friend. So if those are the feelings that you're having, if you're white, again, practicing emotional intelligence and understanding your emotions around this subject can be very beneficial to help you engage in the conversation. And the last thing I'll say, Andrea, and Steve mentioned the economics of it. This is business. And that does bring up emotions when we are telling business people that they may lose profits and they may lose money and it may go somewhere else. We have to honor their stories. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. But as we listen, as we ask others to listen to our story, we must understand, and I don't mean to be directive or prescriptive, but understanding that everybody has their story and everybody was born into a situation just as we were. And if we listen to each other's stories and help each other understand what the impact that is in terms of negative impact, I'm sorry if you have to lose 100 million of your billion, then I think we can move this conversation forward. So, but recognize that when you go back to your companies, your place of businesses, even your places of worship, this is a business issue and it's related to power and economics and revenue. So keeping that in mind and knowing that, again, when we recognize everything that's happening in a situation and our emotions around it, I am strongly convinced that we can move forward collaboratively and together.
Thank you. I
Can
want
I- Something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
I just wanted to tack on to that shame and guilt that David talked about.
Mhm.
And I want to switch the paradigm and have you think about it this way: is silence equals violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes people think about the guilt and shame and that keeps people from saying something. But if you can think about the fact that if I'm silent, I'm complicit and I'm saying that I agree. So instead of thinking about the guilt and shame, think about it that way. I don't know if that would help. And the second thing is, as a gay man, a Black gay man, I had to do that early on, right? I've been out for like 30 years. And I thought, okay, who am I going to lose? Family, friends, job. And so I went through all that about coming out. And then I just said, this is me. This is who I am. If you love me, you respect me, nothing will change. And if you don't, kind of like Janet was saying, I'm going to get new friends. I can get a new job. Now, can't get a new family, but, It is what it is. So those are the things I hit on.
Yeah,
Thank
Steve, that's really helpful, Andrea. And I know you want to ask us another question, but I want to chime in on this.
Mm-hmm.
That word complicit is the important word there. And that's actually the word that I would have used when Janet was asking the question, where does the guilt and shame come from? It comes from that feeling of being complicit. Mm. And I think for many white people, and this is certainly true for me, I'll speak for me, is that tension that we're now feeling between silence is violence and wanting to not do the wrong thing has us flat-footed. Mm. Right? So many of us are feeling like, oh man, I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm not sure where to go, how to act, what to say. And that is I have to imagine, a new experience for many white people who've never had to be in this uncomfortable space before. The world has been a safe place for them. Mm-hmm. So I think that that not knowing what to do next is one of the things that keeps people from mobilizing and from having those one-on-one conversations that Janet talked about earlier.
Andrea, I know you want to ask a question, but I do.
Keep going, Janet. Keep going.
The other thing that makes this so complicated is we're dealing with this at a time we're dealing with another crisis, which is Corona. Yep. And Black people are dying from Corona. Everyone's dying, but as we know, the statistics are saying that Black people are dying at great percentages. So that's another level of grief. That's another level of stress. And I'm seeing, as Andrew was saying, grief is the largest emotion that people are feeling right now based on the chat. And grief, in this case, will go through all of the phases. And those phases, as Stephen said earlier, are those roller coaster phases. and know that you want to manage that grief and find someone to talk to and take care of your mental health as well. And the third thing, Corona, the murders, and then the thing that makes it scary is it's attached, and we're not going to turn this to a political conversation, but realizing it is attached to politics. And we have said two things we don't bring into the workplace or with our friends, and that is religion and politics and emotions, three things. And now we're two of them we have to talk about, and that's emotions and politics. So that's what makes it difficult. And just wanting to bring all of those to your mind and thinking to know that's why people are reticent about talking about it. We've said, particularly to everyone, we don't take emotions to work. Particularly men don't show emotion at all. And we're now saying be really empathetic, be really compassionate, be all of these things. And I don't mean to generalize about all men, but again, most men were taught, based on what I understand, not to show emotion. Now they're having to show emotion about Corona, and now we've compounded it with senseless murders. So just being aware of that, and again, your emotions around that, so that you can take care of you first, and then those around you.
Yeah, so here's, you were talking around a question I wanted to ask directly anyway, and there are many versions of this question that are coming through in the chat. So I'll have you answer this, and then Ryan can help us sort out questions that are also coming in through Q&A, which is, let's say we want to have a cross-race dialogue with, with our Black friends, with our white friends. There seems to be all kinds of rules around what we feel we can say, which you're starting to point out, how we can express what we're feeling, and how much emoting we can do in those situations. Some of what I'm seeing come in the chat is, please don't expect Black people to do your work for you, white people. You can't expect them to explain it all to you. This is part of the exhaustion. From white people, it's like, how much can I express about what I'm feeling so that I don't put a burden on my fellow Black friends? So I would love to hear some context and thoughts from you. Some of these questions are even coming from a workplace if I'm a white leader in my organization, what is it appropriate for me to, how can I be authentic and yet not take over the conversation with the strong emotions I'm feeling? So, can you help us navigate this with some emotional intelligence skill?
Well, I'll take that one first, Andrea. The first emotional intelligence skill that I would suggest we practice is empathy. Empathy for ourselves as well as empathy for others. Everyone is feeling some kind of emotion that brings stress around this. And just having the empathy of knowing if someone is trying to talk to you about it, you can tell the spirit in which they come. So responding to them, and even if it's at a time where you are just so emotionally distraught yourself, saying, can we have this conversation at another time? I know a lot of people are working and they're having webinars about it and having to discuss it. Share what you honestly feel. Someone said in a call I was on the other day, be hard on the subject, be gentle on people. The subject is a difficult one. Be candid about it. Share the history of what you know. Share how you're feeling, but be gentle with the person, because we're still human beings. And one thing about human beings, no matter who's been attacked, people don't like being attacked. And so in those appropriate situations, that's what emotional intelligence about, emotional agility, being able to quickly regulate your emotions in alignment with the situation. Mm-hmm. So I have 2 millennial daughters, And both of them, of course, have had to discuss this at work. And we talked about it. My daughter called me and actually went through what should she say. She wanted to walk through it. I thought that was good of her. I thought it was interesting, but she wanted to walk through it. She wanted to actually make sure that she had gotten all of the emotion that she didn't want to display of anger and, anger in a way that seemed so combative that it would shut down the conversation or cause others to make judgments where they couldn't hear her. So do those things, talk it out with your friends. You cannot do the work for white people. We can tell white people our story. I really have a list, and I hit the email button and say, hey, here's some things you can read, thank you for asking. But if you don't have those lists, check with your organization's HR department. I'm sure they all have them now. They have been all over LinkedIn. So that's another place you can find them. And then have that discussion, because again, companies are now trying to help, and that's a wonderful thing because businesses can drive change.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful thing.
Other thoughts, Stephen or David?
That was so beautifully said. I wanted to just amplify something that I saw in the chat while Janet was talking. So Janet focused on empathy, and someone shared the word compassion along with empathy. I think that's another precious commodity. It's in short supply. And being able to bring that into these conversations is an act not only of perspective taking, but an act of care. And I think that can go a long way to help another human being feel safe and feel heard and feel like they're able to speak their truths.
Mm-hmm. And I want to define that for you. Empathy is saying, I may not understand exactly how you feel, but I hear you and I care, and I want to be here to help or hear you or work with you on this. Compassion is taking it a step further and saying, I am going to take action to help you resolve this problem. Yep. So those are the two emotions that we absolutely need in this case.
I would add about openness. And one of the ways to be open is you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, you also have to build mutual trust. That's something I know that Andrea and I mentioned yesterday about mutual trust. You have to have some mutual trust. And if you set the groundwork in saying, okay, we're going to build trust amongst us, that makes it and say, hey, I trust your opinion. I value you as a person. And then you just have to be vulnerable to be able to share your truth. And then if the person knows that you're coming from a good heart space, they can hear it. They may not understand, but if they value you and you've built that mutual trust, they can go, okay, let me sit with that for a moment. Let me think about it. And you can come back to it. And you have to also be willing to let people have some time. I think sometimes we say something and we want you to give your answer right then. Sometimes people need to let that sit and resonate with them and say, let me come back to that. Because everybody is not, everybody has a different learning style. And so sometimes people need to come back and think about it.
Mm. Yeah. Stephen, you just reminded me of something that, a conversation that we had earlier this week as we were preparing for this conversation. And it was an idea that was brought by our colleague, Ray, who wasn't able to make it. One of the things that Ray said was that in some ways, this all has to happen one conversation at a time.
Uh-huh.
And the idea that of building trust comes from this sequence of things. The first is familiarity, right? Knowing one another, sharing space with one another, listening to one another. And that leads to comfort, which leads to trust. So the thing that stuck with me from that, and the thing that I'm going to carry forward now, I think, is is the importance of those one-on-one conversations for the sake of building trust. And from there, we can build mutual understanding and commitment to each other.
Mhm.
Yeah. I just, when we can recognize what we're feeling, like we said before, then we have the capacity to regulate towards an emotional state where we can be better listeners, where we can offer some compassion, where we can see with empathy and soft eyes. And that's when progress gets made. And it strikes me for how many conversations, when we're talking specifically about the context of cross-racial conversations between white and Black people, that how many white people have had conversations in the past where they had no clue that what they were saying was racist or hurtful. And now they're being open enough to receive that feedback. And that does take a lot of vulnerability and trust, and to take that feedback in and to let that help you be a better person in the next conversation. Following what you said, David, Ray quoted a friend of his, Doug Harris, who said, to make progress, we have to turn emotions into strategies. Mm-hmm. And so we have to start learning how to harness the wisdom of what we're feeling, the messages we're getting from the emotions we're having, to determine what actions we might want to take for ourselves that help people in all contexts. So I know we're less than 10 minutes away from the end of the hour. Ryan, is there a really salient question that you think would be useful for us to talk about before we conclude?
Absolutely, and hoping to hit on too. And I just want to say, Stephen, Janet, David, Andrea, it's just an honor to be in the same room as you all and hearing all of this. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing it. It's an absolute pleasure. There's two things here that I think that have come up often in the chat. And the first is, and it's come up in other webinars as well, how do you recommend dealing with the frustration that comes with trying to know what's truthful versus what's false by way of news outlets, media, social media? There's a lot of frustration with not knowing what the actual truth is. So helping get to the correct truth, I guess. So any advice on managing emotions and getting to the right message?
When I think of truth, I think of this: there is their truth, there's your truth, and there's the truth. The truth is always out there. In dealing with it, you can start with dealing with your truth. What is true to you? What is true that we do know is that Blacks in America were enslaved over 400 years ago, and these practices have been going on. What is true is there are laws and policies and practices out there that are designed to keep Black people at the bottom of the totem pole. And you can see that as you watch statistics. And along with your TV news, as they always say, read. And I know we have a lot on social media, but newspapers, magazines, there's still some outlets out there that deal strictly, or try their best to deal strictly with the facts as they receive them. So within your truth, within your own emotional gut, because your head, your heart, and your gut tell you exactly what you need to do. And that's a part of emotional intelligence too. You'll get options. You'll have an option to ignore it. You'll have an option to go out and help. You'll have an option to fight against it. And that's a part of emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Using those emotions to understand what the options are, and then making decisions that are in alignment, that are good for the whole and yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's a part of emotional intelligence. Being able to understand and make decisions. So that's how I would say that you deal with the truth out there. Just know what you know is true and what your values are. And as Black people, we're banking on those that are in our favor. We know there are some who will never come around, but we need the majority of whites to stand for this and stand up for what's right for humankind.
Yeah, I would just, I know we want to get one more question in here, but it also, this is from some of my own work and reading that I've done is, for those whose hearts and minds cannot be changed, it's not my personal job to change them either. And I think we have to look at how much personal energy we expend in engaging in unhelpful dialogues, and we can still honor opinions and not let it suck the living life out of us. Yep. So I think, there has to be some discernment around when am I engaging in a conversation where there aren't not open hearts, for example, where a really heartfelt dialogue and meaningful conversation can take place versus an argument. So I get, Ryan, you want to get one more question in here?
I'll give it a shot. I'll try. I think Andrea might warrant a second webinar to answer all these very profound questions in here, but something I think that could be very practical for our audience from our panelists here is, where do you suggest this audience goes to learn more about what they need to learn about in order to be an ally, to be a friend, to be a great ear to listen? Stephen, we'll start with you. What would you suggest in terms of something practical that someone can read or turn to as a resource?
I think it's one of those things, Ryan, that came up earlier and I think it was David that said it, about having one-on-one, or maybe it was Janet, but having one-on-one conversations. I think about people that you really trust and have a one-on-one conversation. If you see them out fundraisers, that's why all those door knocking, that's what that's about. You're building people to vote for you. So if you're trying to get information, do the same type of principle. Have one-on-one conversations with people. And then that's going to also pique your interest, and it's going to make you build on those. Like wow, 3 of my Black friends all said the same thing, or you find out different things, you start getting more curious, and then you'll start finding it. It's funny, when you have an interest in something, it's like you just have to start going. You don't know where you're going sometimes. You're just like, kind of like this. I do not know the way. But you take one step, and then you take another, and then all of a sudden, all these other resources start to come your way. So that's one of the ways I would say, start with some conversation.
Yeah. And I would just want to say that we will send out an email in our next email after this with a list of resources. So to the extent that Janet, David, and Stephen, you want to include your recommendations in there, we will make sure that all of the resources you found to be helpful are included in that as well.
And let me say, books, if you want to be in the know, if you work in corporate, these are the top books that are being read. So they may be discussed in some meeting with you. White Fragility, Stamped, and White Fragility is by, I can't think of her last name, but it's that Stamped and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Yeah. Those 3 are the top books that are being talked about and that are being read, and can get you to the quickest answers from both perspectives. Thank you. I see somebody put that in the chat box.
Somebody mentioned.
So yes, but those are the 3: Stamped and How to Be an Anti-Racist is by Kendi, Kendi, and then White Fragility. And I know it's 2 words, Rhonda, but D'Angelo. Thank you, Angela. Andrea. Thank you, Andrea.
I wanted to, sorry, Janet. 2 of those books were on my list as well. Stamped was not, so that's one that I'll check out now for sure. I'll add a couple from my perspective. One I saw in the chat come up actually, and it's not related to race, but it's related to being in relation and conversation with another person, and that is Nonviolent Communication. And excellent book on how to have tough conversations. One I mentioned earlier, a little more lighthearted, but easy to access, and that's the ongoing kind of video conversations that Emmanuel Acho is having, called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And then if you're really heady and you want to challenge your paradigms and the way you think about American history, Howard Zinn's A History of the American People is an excellent read.
And we were talking about emotions. there is a book, Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, is one that talks about emotions. OG Life Lab has a mobile app that you can purchase, and you can learn about emotional intelligence and practicing emotional intelligence on your mobile phone. And there are other books and other groups out there that practice emotional intelligence. And the one thing about emotional intelligence, it's also a movement, because when what has been found, statistics has found, is when we can regulate our emotions, we can be more productive, we can increase our incomes, we can be healthier and happier. So I strongly suggest that you look into emotional intelligence and mindfulness and meditation, and the value that it can bring to you.
Yeah, thank
Some
you.
great books are coming through the chat, and I know that
Yeah, I
Andrew
know.
will catch all of those, and
Yes.
I have those on my list. And I want to say one last thing for me, Andrew, and I know we have to close. I am from the South. I am from Memphis, Tennessee. And I have seen Klansmen. There's a video on YouTube, and it's a TED Talk, and it's Ted Naperville, Naperville, and it is a Black man who befriended the Grand Wizard of the Klan, and why he did so was, again, to affect change. And so you can just do YouTube and look for that. And it's important, as I said before, to understand we all have a story. And some of us in our lives, these aren't choices we would have made, but they were choices we were born into. But now is the time to step up and, just like a child, a grown person, and say, the shackles are coming off. I know we can do the right thing. I know America can be better than this.
Thank you. I think that's the perfect last sentiment to close with, unless you feel compelled to say something else, Stephen or David. No.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us, and thank you
all
for listening.
listening. And I've seen some questions here saying, please do a part 2. I think we will do a part 2. So you'll get more information on the next conversation, so we can continue to help each other navigate the emotional realities of this topic and the way that we can help all people find equity. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, David. Thank you, all of you who participated in the chat. I hope to see you again soon. And thank you so much for bringing your whole self into this conversation. We'll see
OG
you.
Life Lab, we appreciate the forum.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You're here.
Take good care to all of you.
Thank
Talk
you,
to you
everyone.
soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.